It's beginning to look normal.
Should
Okay,
I pop off Zoom then?
I think you can leave now, Adam.
Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yep. Let me know if you have any more issues, but I'll tune off so you don't end up with my face all over the start of it. Okay.
You'll be hearing.
Yep. I'll be watching on YouTube. Good luck. Cheers.
See you later.
Okay. Come on, okay. Okay, hi, I'm Meta Spencer. Are you a cynic or are you a sincere person? I'm not sure which I would be, but I kind of think the guy we're going to talk today is pretty much leaning in the direction of cynicism. And characteristically, typically, if I want to have a fight, I go talk to Robin Collins, and I can always get a good one out of him because he's a very, very good arguer. And so he's read a book lately, but he says that I should read and everybody should read, but I don't have time. So I thought what I'd do is hold a talk show where I would ask him to tell me what it is that I'm missing when I don't read this book. The book is called Cynical Theories. And here is Robin Collins in Ottawa. Hi, Robin.
Hi, Madam.
Good. Okay, we've got a little while in which we can talk about cynicism and what a cynical theory might be, which I have trouble figuring out. But I'm sure you can fill me in. So what is this book and why do you think we should all read it? And who's it by the way?
So this book is written by Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay, two people who have some prominence in sort of the anti-woke world, however that's defined.
What world?
The anti-woke world. So I'm already.
Woke.
Yeah, right. So I'm
really obsolete because this term woke is always gives me a shock because I don't quite know what it means.
Well, it has different meanings too. So, so let me, if I could just preface a little bit. First of all, I'd like the conversation to be broader than just this book because the topic area is huge, and we can't do justice to the topic in half an hour, but I think we can hit on some of the themes. And what I like about the book, it's a bit hard hitting, very critical book. But what I like about it is it brings together a lot of the areas of this discussion, this discourse. There's postmodernism, identity politics, critical theory, and so on. It brings it together in a useful package that allows people to have a conversation about it. That's what I like about the book. And it starts from sort of the history of where critical theory came from, and where it linked up with postmodernism, and when that happened, and I'm not an expert in any of these areas, but
you're probably way ahead of me because every time I see the word postmodern, I shudder and turn the page quickly because it's not been anything that I've understood or even felt like sticking with long enough to figure out. As best I can get is it's some version of cultural relativism.
That would be part of it, I would say. I'm no fan of postmodernism either, but I'll give it this, and I think this was a useful contribution. I mean, postmodernism came out of Foucault and Derrida and sort of the 60s. Critical theory came out earlier, maybe from even the 30s. You would know more about this in sociology than I do, but where I would give postmodernism some utility is this, I think it came out of Lyotard, the rejection of the meta-narrative, and by that meaning a critical look at what, to a large degree, the utopian viewpoints were, and that's both on right and left. So it was a rejection of the idea, the Marxian idea that communism, let's say, was the inevitable progression of society, and it's just a question of getting on board and pushing the envelope, or even the libertarian capitalists who believe that, you know, ultimately free enterprise in a perfect world would be the ideal world. I mean, there's religious aspects that could be criticized, but the postmodernists criticize the idea that there's an inevitable utopia at the end. And so I would say that's a useful contribution because the critique is valid. And I think to a certain extent, left and right kind of took in that criticism and said, oh yeah, okay, so you know, things didn't necessarily work out as according to plan. So let's make amendments and let's see what makes sense still. So, you know, so to me that was useful. But the trouble is, postmodernism, I think I remember it in kind of in the 80s and the 70s, but you know, it was kind of very negative. It was all about deconstruction and tearing down. It wasn't really about building up. It wasn't really about, you know, okay, so let's say, you know, let's say the ultimate Marxian vision isn't possible or didn't happen or whatever. But you know, so where you want to go with this, right? And so part of the problem was
By the way, I call attention to the fact you're speaking in the past tense, as if there ain't no such thing no more.
Well, about postmodernism, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
No. So that's a good observation, because I think what happened was it lost its progress, or it lost its clientele. I mean, I'm not sure how to put it. Its momentum to a large extent because it wasn't going anywhere, and so a lot of people. We're talking primarily about academia here, I think. I remember. I mean, I took some courses in the '90s, and I remember, you know, the sort of the old left, you know, former or, you know, moderate Marxist, if you can call them that. They poo-pooed postmodernism as, you know, this was just a blip, an irritant, and we got over it, and now we're moving on, you know. So what happened though was it teamed up with critical theory. So and critical theory was also looking at power, systems of power. There's a lot of overlap here with postmodernism, but it went into, and here I think is the gravest problem. It went into identities based on sort of tribal narrowing of humanity into gender and race and ability, disability, religion, you know, anyway, identity politics writ large, and interestingly, and I think this is not unimportant. In fact, it's maybe the most important part, that social class virtually disappeared. Now, there'll be some who say that's not true, but in terms of, let's say, working class, blue collar people feeling the economic pinch, as compared to critical theory advocates in academia who are, you know, well off, don't really have the experience of working class people feeling the economic pinch. There's a division happening, and you know, whereas the old Marxists, the old left, was very much on about social class and improving the economic situation of the vast majority, now it became about these tribes based on gender and sexual orientation and race and so on and so on. So this momentum gathered, particularly in academia. I mean, if you wanted to take it from a class perspective, it was middle class, upper middle class people who really were taking this on in academia. And it began to take over. And within 10 years or so ago, people who were learning in basically in social sciences, sociology, and other areas, in critical studies like, critical race theory, gendered studies, post-colonial studies, and on and on. I mean, these are all departments all of a sudden, right? They started leaving and graduating and entering the workforce, particularly in education and in other areas. And so there, even though I would say generally amongst the population, some of this is perceived as incoherent or irrelevant or uninteresting. It came to, I don't know if it's dominating now, but it's very, very present. I mean, everybody hears the terminology now.
Well, but just a sec, because I don't want you to get away with saying it doesn't mean anything to the general population, because that is the basis of the split. I mean, within the U.S. at any rate, all these fights about gender or the fights about whether or not you want identity politics, or you're talking about class. Those are the two perspectives that are available to any political party.
Right.
And so it is really relevant. It really is.
Right. Yeah. So let me clarify. I absolutely agree with you. And this is fomented in our current situation. And the US is much, much worse than anywhere else in the world. It is to a large extent a North American phenomenon, not entirely, but it's very much an American phenomenon. There's a lot of it in Canada, but it's much, much of a polarizing problem in the United States. So when I said it didn't have relevance amongst the population, what I meant was the theory, the ideology of, let's say, identity politics is not embraced by the vast majority of people, at least not a couple of years ago. So there was a very excellent report about tribes. I forget the name. I've actually written down some of the references here. What's it called? Anyway, I'll think of it in a minute. But it was about tribes in the United States primarily, and what they found in the polling that they did was something like 80 to 90% of people rejected the idea of identity politics and political correctness. Amongst conservatives, it was like 98% rejection of the terms and the concepts. Amongst liberals, it was like 65% rejection. The population.
But the claim is, I don't know how valid it is, but that's where the Democratic Party went wrong, is they are so much oriented toward
right.
Tribes or ethnic communities or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, it's not the orientation towards minority or oppressed areas or population demographics. The problem is the ideology, which is dividing people into these sort of silos of identity, mm-hmm. where the more of the oppressed identity list that you have, the more aware you are of reality. And, so if take myself, a straight white male, I'm the worst. I'm least able to understand the problems of the oppressed because I have all these privileges and so on and so on. So it doesn't matter what my ideas are. It doesn't matter whether, what my education or my track record is. I have the wrong tribal categories. So this was, if in terms of the polarization in the United States, I think what happened was, Hillary Clinton's reference to the deplorables did not help. That was a polarizing moment, and whether that was on itself enough to elect Donald Trump, it's hard to say. But and then the polarization exacerbated because of social media, of course. But at the heart of the division is this incoherence of one side to the other. In terms of what we need to solve our problems. Do we look at each other, from the Martin Luther King perspective, from the quality of our ideas and content of our character, or do we look at each other by the color of our skin? You know, so that was a liberal, progressive position that was dominant. You know, we talked about being a colorblind society. Now, if you say you want a colorblind society in the terms of Martin Luther King, you're saying you're in denial. You know, you don't understand. You're privileged, and you're out of the camp. So, a large proportion of people, especially I would say, you know, people who have precarious existences, who fit into the categories now criticized, you know, working class, white working class in the United States in particular, white working class males, there's this resentment about how they're being portrayed. And so, you know, they're being called racist and sexist and so on. And then they react and say, no, I'm not. And then there's this polarization because somebody like a populist leader like Trump steps up and says, you know, come along for the ride, we'll push back against this idiocy that's happening, right? And you know, there's a great deal of truth in acknowledging that there is this idiocy, this polarization that's very destructive. So that's kind of what the book is about. I'll show you what this.
Yeah. Okay. But I don't know whether to be surprised by what you've just said. I think you've crystallized very important issues, and I don't know which way I want to jump, but certainly the word. Let's just start with the word cynical, because the title of the book you're talking about is Cynical Theories.
Right.
Why that word? What is?
So, you know, in preparation for, I was taking notes for today, you know, and as usual, you know, like I have 7 pages of notes. There is so much to this topic. It's almost hopeless to try to narrow it down. But one of the things I did look up was, okay, what does cynical actually mean? Because there's different ways of using the term. Like if I'm cynical, it's like I'm worse than skeptical. I just don't believe anything will ever have a positive end. You know, that's kind of that cynical. But the cynical that's being used here is in reference to the advocates of critical theory, or let's say let me just say that there's some truth in some of the theory. We should acknowledge that there's some truth, and the conversation needs to take place as to about what is true and what isn't. But the definition of cynical that's being used here is.
Well, I think of it as implying a kind of hypocrisy.
Yeah,
You're
right.
using a point of view for an ulterior motive, not the intrinsic meaning of the thing.
Yes, but also rejecting sort of commonly held positions with a personal advantage to be gained at the end of it. So, you know, the book is partly looking at the theorists who are academics who are doing very well, thank you, by peddling theory that is potentially harmful and hurtful and divisive. But they're like a famous one is, and a lot of people will recognize Robin DiAngelo, the name for the book White Fragility, which is one of the main texts that are part of this sort of critical theory envelope. And she's a she goes out doing race training or racial diversity training or critical race theory training among corporations. So she is, you know, she's called in, you know, to either let's solve a problem or let's make sure that our corporation is on the right track. And then she'll go in and tell everybody, you know, like, you know, if you are white, you know, you should understand that you are inherently racist, that you should embrace your racism, and there's really no way out of this other than to accept this and to, you know, apologize forever for your inherent racism, you know, and I'm actually not exaggerating to a large degree her message, you know. So she has a personal gain out of this, which is she has a business of selling this sort of message to large corporations, right? And now I think there's a lot of pushback against her, but the point is that she is one of the main advocates of this, and her book is, you know, #1 bestseller. If you go into Amazon, look up, you know, whatever, the political correctness or diversity training or something, her book will be one of the top 5. So it's
Okay, let me play with this, because now the question is, how much of that could we believe?
right.
And I think I kind of accept the notion that yeah, we're all racist. In other words, this is part of the culture, and you couldn't grow up and not have learned stereotypical views of what different communities are like and so on, any more than you could grow up and not have heard the Mary Had a Little Lamb, or know what Santa Claus is or something. It's just part of the culture, and you absolutely are exposed to it and learn what it means.
Right.
And then maturation, or becoming socially responsible, consists of learning to bracket that stuff and suppress it, or not allow it to be part of your action plan or behavior. And so we all learn. Every now and then I will catch myself making an assumption that really is a racist assumption that just comes out of the background that I have as a part of human society, my community. So then I try to, say, aha, I caught myself again doing something racist. And, once in a while, maybe I even express it in some way and somebody else catches me doing it. So that's part of it. Now, do I need special training? Do I need to apologize? That's where I think I would leave her point of view behind. I don't know that I need, or most of us require, some massive overhaul. We just need to start, to continue paying attention where we can to the kind of stupid assumptions that we carry around with us as part of our cultural baggage. So how much would I agree with what you've described as her point of view? Maybe halfway. I just don't think that we need to make it into a project quite at the scale that maybe she is.
Yeah. So I agree with most of what you said. I would challenge some of it. Let's just take the concept of racism. The word has changed its meaning.
Absolutely.
So yeah. So
originally, it simply meant a doctrine that many human behaviors are hereditary and are transmitted in human populations with a common gene pool, etc.
right.
And it's just a scientific, or let's say anti-scientific theory, but an assumption about the way traits are transmitted. But now it's definitely a social category.
Yeah, I didn't mean so much the concept of race itself, whether that has changed, and I guess to a certain extent. I mean, there are people. I'm one of them who challenges even the concept of race. But this is a secondary topic. So
Well,
what I meant,
what I meant. I agree with you. Yeah.
Right. So what I meant was racism, and who is racist. The concept of that has changed as well. So it used to be, the same as white supremacy. It used to be, when you say white supremacy, I mean, what do you think of? If I say white supremacist, what do you think of?
Neo-Nazis.
Right. That's exactly what I would say. So that's not now the meaning. Now, white supremacy now is simply the reality, the argument goes, that we have this society that's built on a history of X, Y, and Z, some of which is racist, slavery and on and on. And so we are all racist because we are part of the society, whether you want it or not. And beyond that, I mean, if you wanted to go back to, in-group and out-group bias, I mean, there may even be biological aspect to this question that I don't particularly want to address either. But the problem is that the racism now is perceived to be not only all-encompassing, but it is also, it's also to some extent focused on certain groups. That is, there's white racism, there's not black racism, and there's no way out of it. It's permanent, it's forever. No progress has been made. It's as if, you know, slavery never ended. The civil rights movement never happened. It's all as bad, and it will always be as bad because it's based on these systems of power that are tribally done. So we're not looking anymore for universal concepts, for shared goals, solidarities. Now it's about intersectionality, right? So it's let's put ourselves into tribes and let the downtrodden within each tribe join together against the successors within each tribe, so-called. No longer is it about really social, economic class, well-being, and so on, things that we can change. These are all, essentialist concepts that we can't change, and therefore there's no way out. So that's a very cynical way of looking at life as well, right? And it's not one that most progressives have historically supported. Tribalism and sort of race kind of conceptualization has always been a right-wing phenomenon. It's always been seen as negative and regressive.
Right.
But what's changed is a section of the left, and I would call it, I don't know, I would call it regressive left, but you know, that's just name calling. A section of the left has taken on this tribalist thinking, and it's extremely dangerous. And the outcome in the United States, for instance, is this sort of, you know, a legitimate, but first of all, there are legitimate grievances about groups of people within society that have been disadvantaged over time. And the goal is surely to correct those things and not to pretend they don't exist. So that there is a truism there within the critique of people like Robin DiAngelo, that, you know, there are these biases, hidden or otherwise, that are structural. The goal, however, is not to say, you know, they're permanent, let's live with them and let's just sort of apologize. The goal is to change, right? And I think if you would go up to the advocates of these theories, they would agree with that statement. But in practice, I don't think they're moving ahead, because the divisiveness is evidence, in my view, of polarization, of, you know, calling names, not
Let's
having
go
conversations.
back, I think maybe 20 years, where I think this issue became the most, it was conscious. It was a conscious discussion about, what do they call it when they, affirmative action.
Yeah.
Let's go back to where I have always leaned toward, and here I have to say this quietly because of exactly what you're pointing out. I'll get dumped on if I tell the truth, which is I kind of believe in being colorblind and actually gender blind. I don't want to be promoted because I'm a woman. Thank you. And that is, you know, I'm going to get a lot of.
You're not allowed to say that.
That's right. I
That's
definitely am not.
Yeah.
And I will offend people, and I'll have people mad at me forever for having said it. But it is sort of the truth. And affirmative action was the point where you say we have to acknowledge that certain groups have been disprivileged, and we have to give them a head start, is the kind of concept, or an extra boost, or some compensating, you know, benefit, which certainly makes sense.
Yeah.
But then once you do that, you've made a decision that you're working with categories of people and not trying to overlook those categories. Yeah. And the time comes, and even then it was regarded as, well, this is a temporary measure. Let's do it for 10 or 15 years, and then we will go back to being colorblind or race blind or ethnic blind.
Yeah.
But then there were quotas for admission to this or that. And you notice, for example, both Obama and now even more Biden are they promise that they will have a cabinet that looks like the American population, in that there will be a certain number of Asians, a certain number of Blacks, a certain number of women, etc. And maybe more than the quota would be in the regular population. I think Biden's got more women than men to prove some sort of point. And okay, but I don't think, I've always been uncomfortable with that. I would really rather make the point that we don't even care what your gender or your ethnicity is if you're good enough. And I see that right there, of course, then we have a whole different set of problems about meritocracy.
Yeah.
It's a different conversation.
So you and I and a lot of other people, we're old left, right? So
I've never been left. I'm
okay, but okay, liberal. Let's say liberal for the sake of argument.
All right.
Anyway, I share much of what you just said, and there are many strands to that conversation that we could go down. We could talk about affirmative action and whether it works or not. That's not the sale what's the word? Sale I hang my hat on. No, that's not the fight that I go to the wall on. Affirmative action. I personally do not like the concept. I think it's racist. But my assumption is the goal is the same, which is to correct an error of the past and move on so that we can become colorblind and so on. There's a big argument here about Shelby Steele wrote a very good essay and then a book based on this. And like some of these people are conservatives, which is weird. Some of the people who are very articulate in this, from the point of view of someone who's been left-wing most of my life, including now, I do listen to other people and other points of view. So the argument on affirmative action has been, well, you know, one of the problems is if you do get in to the system through affirmative action, will people always look at you and say you got in because of affirmative action, or is it because of that you had value and deserved to be there? Now, I assume that there's so many people who can get in based on their skills that, to a large extent, you know, nobody gets in, or very few get in because of affirmative action. But, you know, I know there's people who would definitely say they know the opposite. So anyway, I don't want to fight that battle right now. That's an old one. And my view is like,
it is related to what you're talking about.
Yeah, in terms of resentments and grievances from those who feel that they were put aside because they had the wrong this or that.
Hold on, I want to close the door because she's running a vacuum cleaner. I'll be right back. I'll edit out this little segment because I couldn't hear anything. All right, go on.
So I mean, I'm in agreement with you. So the views that you just expressed and that I happen to agree with, generally speaking, are considered verboten. They're just not unacceptable views. That, for instance, if you see a black man killed by a white cop, you must jump to the conclusion that this was a racist killing. You're not actually allowed to have a conversation about, you know, could there be other explanations? Like in social sciences, it's very rarely the case that a single variant explains anything, right? It's almost always more than that, right? But I would say that one of the biggest problems that I see is the conversations are being cut off. So you see, you know, deplatforming and cancel culture and there's a whole series of terms that are in play now about this phenomenon, and a lot of people who are actually quite reactionary are grabbing hold of of what's going on and saying, what about my free speech, right? I mean, it used to be the left were defenders of free speech. Now you see this sort of cancel culture. The left is the ones wanting to shut people down because language is violence, and we just cannot have conversations in universities anymore about at University of Ottawa, the N-word. You're just not allowed to have that conversation. It used to be, you would use the word as in an academic fashion to show how hurtful it is, or you would discuss Shakespeare and the
Merchant of Venice.
Well, for example, right? I mean, there are people who look at the Merchant of Venice and because of their perception of of critical theory because literature, it was strongly linked to some of this stuff, that Shakespeare was a bigot, or without seeing that the Merchant of Venice, in fact, the famous line about blood what is it now? The one I'm talking about anyway. There's a famous line. It's actually an attack on bigotry. But it's perceived now as
am I not a man too, or something like that?
Yeah, this is the line, right? Something to do with blood, I think. So these words are now, Shakespeare's not allowed. Huckleberry Finn is not allowed. There's this shutting down of discussion, right? And it's quite broad, and it goes into censorship, it goes into self-censorship, and it goes into polarity of society. So, I mean, how much of Trump's coming into the presidency was a result of this resentment? I think I don't know if it was the straw that broke the camel's back, but it was a major factor, I would think. The white male working class left the Democratic Party and they went over to Trump, for instance. That's a big chunk of the population.
Yeah. Okay. Now let me put you on the spot. Which side? Let's exaggerate a minor point, just for the argument. If you are really an old Marxist or anything like an old lefty, you will emphasize social class and the disadvantages that come from class and disprivilege and so on that go with mostly class. Along with the effects of education, which is again, you link to class. And I don't think that explains the actual politics of populism. I don't also think it's certainly better explained by racism. That is, the disparity between Black and white voters in the US is just absolutely far, far more important in explaining Trump support versus Biden's election than any other factor except for rural urban residents. Now, why rural urban residents is so powerful along with race is another matter. Those two things don't necessarily fit together in any theory I can think of. But certainly the notion that race is the determining factor is an important one. And almost everybody, every writer that I know who's trying to explain Trump's popularity starts off with a class-based analysis, saying it's really, you start with the Rust Belt and all these unemployed workers who were displaced because of globalization, because their jobs were sent overseas, et cetera. And these are the people who resent, who have bitter feelings and who voted for Trump. Well, in the 2016 election, there were some of those. That was a little bit of the factor, but it wasn't a very big factor. And I have examined the exit polls from the 2020 election, And I'll tell you flat out that the class factor is almost negligible.
Yeah.
And
No,
both in terms of economics and even in terms of education, you don't get any disparities in or any significant pattern of voting either for Trump or for Biden by education until you get to the postgraduate level. And then there's something like a 10 percentage point difference where
Yeah.
postgraduate degree holders are maybe 10 percentage points more likely to vote for Biden than for Trump.
right.
On the other hand, if you look at the class thing, you don't get any difference by income level until you get up to the $100,000 per year level, at which point then you see a significant jump of 10 percentage points or so in favor of Trump. Well, so, you know, the person who that we should be looking for would be the illiterate postgraduate or something. And you don't find many of those. So I can't think of a coherent explanation that has anything to do with class. It really isn't. It has to do with race. That there is a big explanation there. But it really has to do with cultural differences. If you look at attitudes about gun control or same-sex marriage or abortion or marijuana legalization or whatever, those cultural differences,
Right.
there are huge differences. So we see, I think, and I keep trying to tell people, and they won't even look at the exit polls for me because I can prove to you the difference is just not there.
Mhm.
Social class isn't the explanation.
Right.
But
Okay. So
the cultural differences and the resentment that comes from feeling we are regarded as backwoods hicks, illiterate jerks that don't have we're not given the kind of respect that we should. So we resent having been shunted aside and discounted as useless people.
alienated, right?
But that alienation is not we have to stop assuming that it's attributable to any actual economic or demographic factors, because these factors, gender, marital status, it doesn't matter. Those things don't matter. What matters is simply subjective. That is your attitude about guns or abortion or whatever. Those things are, it's not rooted in social structural demographic factors. It's rooted in imaginary sense of rank. And here where you start comparing yourself, am I higher than the guy next door or regarded as lower status than the guy next door? And I really resent it. And it may not be based on any objective economic
let me cut in because you're saying so much that I'm trying to remember which one I wanted to respond to first. I agree, generally speaking, with what you're saying here. I believe there's a hierarchy. It's a hierarchical society for sure. There's resentments that are based on your placement in the hierarchy in many cases. It's not necessarily economically based. To be clear, I'm not currently a Marxist, I would say. I do look at social class probably first, but not only. And one thing about, I looked through the last 10 elections or something like that in the United States. And one thing that really stood out was the separation between the first two, the winning candidate and the losing candidate. I mean, sometimes there was a third candidate that kind of disrupted this a bit. But the difference between the Democrats or the Republicans winning in terms of popular vote was like 52% to 49%, and 51 to 53. There are a couple of exceptions. One of the Reagan elections, he had like 6% lead, and one of the Clinton, the same thing. But generally speaking, winning and losing in an election in the United States is based on a very small percentage of the population shifting. And so the question is, what will cause that shift to happen. And if you're able to polarize the population and develop resentments among a large section, let's say the white male working class, and you draw attention to grievances that are culturally determined, although they have resentments that are economic as well. In fact, you could even say, we're going to save jobs and nail China for taking away your jobs. And so we'll bring back the jobs to the US. And now you've got all these low-paying, non-unionized jobs in the South where you didn't have jobs before, but boy, thank your lucky stars that now you have a job. You could swing the vote that way. And race can very much become an issue, especially if a large demographic is accused of being racist when they know, well, they may become racist because of being accused of being racist. That's the easiest way to make somebody racist, is to accuse them of being racist. And then they feel resentment, and then they start being, uber self-aware of themselves and of who they're not. And so you can drive up these divisions based on race and culture where they needn't exist. So I agree with you that a lot of this is cultural, but I would say economic precariousness is a huge factor in that shift in terms of Trump. And what accelerates the division is
but look,
social...
I'm sorry, but the voters for Trump are higher income level than the voters for Biden.
Yeah, so
If
it used
anything,
to be,
but it doesn't matter until you get to the $100,000 level.
I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you. I'm not making an economic determinist argument here. I'm just saying that part of this drift, if it's a 1 or 2% difference, for instance, to what extent did Trump win over Hillary Clinton because she used the words the deplorables? I would not be surprised if that was a 2% shift and the Democratic Party lost its base, who went over to Trump, and then all hell broke loose.
Except I'm not sure what exactly she meant. What category she had in mind. Is there such a category? And what do they all have in common?
It's not to say that there's no such thing as a deplorable, but the point was he was able to use this characterization against as to be so that people who felt they were being accused, she was referring to, redneck, working class, Southern, whatever. And it was a stupid comment. He exploited it, and he ran with it, and she couldn't get out of it. So I mean, I don't know how much.
Here's what I think. I think you and I both would agree with her in our heart of hearts. These people are deplorable. We really do.
There are people who are deplorable.
We do have contempt for those people. Yeah. Now that's the truth. That's the resentment. They know that we are elites. We are supposedly experts. Some of us are scientists and know how to take engines apart and things like that you do, which I don't know how to do. But at any rate, there are people who have status because of our professional expertise. Yeah. Those are really resented. Science is rejected now because it's run by these experts who are so snooty that they're looking down on people. And we do. And we
ironically,
we really do look down on them for being ignorant, bigoted, uninformed, believing in complete nonsense, etc. Right. And unfortunately, I don't know what to do about that. I can try to hide it. I can be polite. I can even try to reach out to some people and say, come over to dinner. But I don't really want to hang out with them. The truth is, there is a gap, a cultural gap between sophisticated people and backwoods rural people, or ignorant, uninformed people. And they feel it, the resentment, and I don't blame them for feeling resentful. On the other hand, I also don't know a thing in the world, honestly, to do about it. There's this guy who's on TV quite a bit, Van Jones, who actually is black guy who can listen
Yeah, I
to
know. Yeah.
bigots, and he does a good job of being able to hear other people
Yeah.
uh, without feeling contempt, as far as I can tell, which is impressive to me, because I have just loathing for them, for people who take these, uh, uh, well, you can tell what my point of view is.
Yeah.
So the truth is, there is disdain, there is social distancing in that sense, a stratification of values, and and it would be a whole lot easier to equalize our social class by giving people money
Yeah. Well,
than it would be to overcome this, because I don't know how to overcome this.
yeah. So in terms of solutions, maybe that's where you're heading here now. First of all, I make a huge amount of effort not to attack somebody based on some personal characteristics that I may find deplorable. So what I find is important is having a conversation with people as reasonable as possible, and that's not always possible. But I find that the impossible comes from both far left and far right, or it really is all over the place. Some of like you mentioned, you're talking about these people are anti-scientific. The irony here is that the cynical theory postmodernism phenomenon is very anti-scientific as well. It's a rejection of universalism, objectivity. It's about now viewpoints are determined by your status within the ranks of the tribe. And the more tribes you claim to, the much more status you have. So it's no longer about what evidence is. It's now about your point of view. The different ways of knowing is the famous phrase, but it's been worsened. So I don't want to generalize about who's scientific and who isn't. I'm just saying that there's an irony here in the cynical theories as being anti-scientific as well, and unwilling to have conversations. So in terms of solutions, I agree that number one solution is pumping money into useful places so that people are less precarious and they're have more stable lives. They're less likely to be pulled over into populism, and also listening to find out what the grievance is and having a serious conversation about the grievance. A lot of the grievances on all sides here are legitimate. A lot of the complaints are legitimate. So, are we going to have, I would say, I would push back against this identity. I strongly push back against identity politics. I'm not going to put up with it. I'm not going to accept any of the demands on my time or on my beliefs that I disagree with. If I hear something that sounds suspicious to me, I'm going to say there's something wrong here. What's wrong with it?
Okay, but let me stop you when you say the first place to work is to try to overcome economic imbalances.
And
I've got nothing against doing that, but
yeah.
I absolutely don't think it's going to make any difference, because somebody was just reporting on the social class of the people storming Congress the other day.
Yeah.
Turns out they are the pillars of society in their communities.
Yeah.
They are not down and out people. They are not people who lost their jobs to globalization. They are ex-military officers, or the auto dealers in their town, etc. So these are substantial.
Okay, so let's
not going to overcome that by giving them more money.
Let's pull this apart a little bit. Okay, so there's extremists on both sides. Okay, there are people with grievances on both sides. The extremists are a tiny fraction of the population. Even those who went, at the call of Trump up on Capitol Hill, even those went at his command to protest. It was a percentage of those who actually stormed the barricades. And these are lunatics. These are deplorables on the right I don't even know if they're political, to tell you the truth. They're hugely unacceptable in the eyes of everyone. So however, you see that the population in the United States has gravitated to two poles, such that you have a significant percentage of the population who actually is willing to listen to people like Trump and to kowtow to him and to nod away and to defend him. When you have that percentage of the population, like what has changed in the United States such that suddenly half the population has lost their minds? Like you have to ask yourself what's happening. And I agree with you that economics does not explain this away. This is populism writ large. And this is based on grievances, some legitimate and a lot of it not. The leadership of these lunatic sides are not necessarily undereducated. Some of them are, obviously, but a lot of them are smart people manipulating, through Breitbart and all these entities, that we know about. These are not stupid people, right? These are some of them highly educated advocates, but they're extremists, right? But the extremists, you have to separate the extremists from the mass, let's say, on both sides.
Well, yeah, but what are you going to do with either of them? I don't care. I'll agree to whatever theory you want, so long as you give me a good recipe for fixing it. And I don't know of any.
Right. Well, some of the obvious ones is that you do need to put some of them in jail. The ones that broke the windows and bashed in either Black Lives Matter protests or who on Capitol Hill. I mean, these people should be arrested.
Well, no also another much more problematic thing is you could shut down Breitbart, you could shut down Fox News, etc. If you did that, it would cut these things off at the roots.
No, I don't think that would. I'm not. Yeah,
with
I
that
don't think that's.
point of view,
I don't think that's a good idea.
No.
Now, so anyway, I've had a very interesting conversation actually with somebody who is a Trump supporter. This is in the last few days. Trump supporter who was raising all sorts of concerns about the shutting down of Parler and of kicking Trump off of Twitter and all this stuff. So I had a very interesting conversation because we were very, very different in our perspectives. But I wanted to engage to find out where do we actually agree, because we know where we disagree, but where do we actually agree, right? So I went through the discussion of at what extent can you actually throw somebody off of a platform, right? So there's two aspects. One is the legal aspect. In the United States, you're not allowed to slander somebody, yell fire in a theater. You're not allowed to incite violence imminently. In other words, you can say, the revolution is coming, but you can't say, let's break windows in the Capitol building, for instance. You can't provoke that. You can't incite it. So that's a legal requirement in the United States, right? You have to shut that down. But the other side is you have these platforms that are privately owned that have standards of use, terms of use, and they say, you can't go that, you can go this far or you can't go this far, and if you cross our line, we'll shut you down. So that's what happened with Twitter, right? They said, whether or not Trump technically in a court of law you could find out incited violence, or whether he dog whistled and it got the lunatics to go crazy. I mean, it was very predictable that a certain number of extremists would have done what they did, because if Trump hadn't said the words he said, and Giuliani and so on, they hadn't said these words, it's very unlikely that what happened would have happened. So I think you can probably draw a causal link between these things. But in terms of Twitter shut Trump down because they say, you're violating our terms of use, and therefore you're off, And so some people complain and say, well, that's not fair. That's a breach of freedom of speech because he didn't actually incite, whether he did or not to be determined. But I'm pretty libertarian on free speech, but I have limits, right? And my limits coincide pretty much with the way the U.S. does it in terms of, you can't yell fire and you can't incite imminent violence, right? But I'm not against shutting down Fox. I think people need to have these vehicles to rant. And but what you want is you want the debates, and you want conversation that's not so heated that people are talking past each other. And so on Fox, you want Fox to have, you know, like lefties on there so that they can have it. And same as on, you know, whatever the left wing, I don't consider it CNN.
MSNBC or so.
Yeah.
Okay, we've used up our hour and a little bit more. Well, I was going to do it half an
Can I-
hour, but we, if
can
I
I
go
make-
if I go over an hour, they won't let it's a problem on Facebook. So I have
Okay,
to.
can I just make two caveats I wanted to add on at the very end. One is, and I'm saying this is funny because I feel I have to say it, but I want to make sure that the views that I express are my own views. So they should not be associated with any of the groups I'm affiliated with. I wanted to make that clear because there have been some issues in the past on this. Another question that I discovered in the last day or so is that there's some baggage associated with James Lindsay, who is the co-author of the book, that people may want to look into. And it's in terms of who funds his organization. And as it turns out, a key funder is a fellow, I'm trying to remember his first name, O'Fallon is his second name, who is a far-right conspiracy theorist, denier of COVID, Trump supporter.
Wow.
Now, James Lindsay is a liberal, and the book is a really, really good book worth reading. But I wanted to make that known because if anybody discovers that, they're going to go, what exactly is being peddled here? I do not see anything in the book that suggests anything of the nature of that funder, but you know, it's a legitimate question and it's bad optics for sure. So I just want to make that point.
Interesting point. Okay. This has been very interesting. And I'm sure we literally could go on six or 7 hours more and not exhaust it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, man. I enjoyed
All
it.
right. You take care.
Bye.
Bye.